Hello? A Goofy movie? Oh, honey, it's just Josh.
Horror is a genre that is indulged in many forms. Hell, I love a good scare, whether it be someone chasing somebody else with a knife on the same street, demons sucking you into TVs, or sending you through a psychological frenzy that makes you rethink everything around you. No matter the time of year or how I'm feeling, it may end up being the thing I want to see the most. And it's not because I'm a psycho. So first, exactly what is it?
Horror is defined as an overwhelming and painful feeling caused by something frightfully shocking, terrifying, or revolting, a shuddering fear. This can come in the form of intense theoretical horror, paranormal content, or quick and fun jump scare. Anything that can give you a good fright with intentions to do so are what make up the horror category and genre.
Although with horror, there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is or what it was meant to be or why. Whether it be religious extremists, critics, or a blatant way of undermining an entire scope, some people just don't understand horror. The first of these categories are people who make the subgenre itself. Subsectioning certain things can be seen as taboo or unnecessary for overly problematic or disgusting means.
Horror as a genre is incredibly versatile and has a lot of love to enjoy. One of those things is not, however, the sexism that runs rampant in horror media. Nowadays, when people see femmes in horror media, there's either an expectation, positive or negative, or explicit joy in the fact she will more than likely be splayed out sexually or tormented in a very intimately graphic way. But the men of the series straight up won't face that same kind of brutality. There are series that keep the brutal pace for all genders, so those are excluded from this point. The first Terrifier, X, The Black Room, and similar series, including Snuff and such, are examples. Horror is so much more than creating gore porn, but now there's a misconception about body horror and gore horror should be like, with many going in expecting borderline snuff and being disappointed when they're instead faced with body horror that takes a more creative approach, like movies such as The Substance.
The categories of torture porn and gore porn are also questionable because while you have things like Terrifier and X, you also have things like Saw. While some may have a plot or characters to do something, some films are just made with the point of the character ripping out guts constantly or ravaging the damsel in distress. The Saw films can technically be labeled as torture porn to some, but this is a franchise, specifically with the first 3 films, I'll give gold stars to for having a plot and a purpose for the characters. For the most part. It's a silver lining and a differentiation between the two. Some films that are torture P-word, that are gore for their own sake, have the characters do nothing but suffer. With the damsel in distress's sexism and the torture P-word, they're harmful, constant misconceptions that damage the genre and give it a bad rep, causing others to turn a blind eye.
Horror being seen as wrong or satanic is innately a black and white perspective, but also a flimsy one at that. Horror has been used by many as a way to make strong points, to invoke emotion, to get audiences to empathize with people they otherwise wouldn't. Horror doesn't have to be Satan and murder. Psychological horror is such a popular genre for a reason. Movies like All Quiet on the Western Front could in some capacity count as psychological horror, and I truly doubt many would argue that movie to be satanic in any way, shape, or form. Horror is uncomfortable and can play into religious themes, but that doesn't disavow its existence and importance.
There are a plethora of complaints about the horror genre, and if it isn't Satanism or religion, it's people claiming it's evil or too violent, or it's something that shouldn't exist. Saying that things are too evil or that it showcases cruelty and murder, which is why it is wrong, is something I heavily disagree with. Not saying it isn't evil, and I'm not saying murder is right, but part of me feels like everything in fiction is allowed to be made. I think having this kind of terrifying media might be a necessity. In the case of horror, it utilizes the feelings of fear and sorrow into a form of entertainment. The subgenre often contained things from the supernatural, beings not of this world, or from fantasy that end up existing in ours, or aspects from the damned playing in religion, uses themes of demons, hell, and the devil to invoke scares and survival. Or it could showcase serial killers, psychopaths, evil human beings who are motivated by their own sick perspective of reality or are being controlled by an external source. With all of these subgenres, it shows us a twist on the things that we would normally fear taking our lives away in reality. The adrenaline rush you get from fear, or the enjoyment you can get from seeing something so dark, can help indulge in a part of your imagination that every human being has. Because in reality, violence is not an easy topic for any person to speak on. It's a real thing, and there are evils that exist day to day no matter where your faith lies. I believe being able to find these things entertaining in a fictional setting is important, as all things deserve to be turned into fantasy. Enjoying what would be unpleasant in reality is not a crime, and in fact, I also believe it could be seen as healthy. Not that enjoying a slasher film desensitizes you to real violence, because it doesn't, but being able to have popcorn and enjoy what is shot as a predator and prey flick isn't a bad thing. On top of this, slasher films usually have a fictional character with iconic traits, and the sequence of events aren't always the most realistic. Likewise with films that play into psychological or supernatural torture, like the ones that pull from religion or the devil and demons. In faith, those are creatures of sin and dastardly actions, so taking inspiration from faith and turning it into entertainment or a lesson can help fathom the idea of those evils.
Horror as a whole serves many purposes and is art. Art is meant to invoke feelings from you and make you think, but just because the feeling may be unpleasant doesn't make the material itself bad. In the same way, some cheap spooks are great in their own space and right. Sometimes you need to be scared into thinking critically, and other times you just want to feel a quick adrenaline rush and fall off a jump scare high, either by yourself or with some buddies. Both of these things are important and give horror so much value.
Horror isn't unnecessary, and it isn't evil to have. Being able to take what is disgusting and hurtful in reality, turning it into a fountain of a worldwide enjoyed medium, is completely okay. In fact, it can be almost impressive that we find ourselves having a good time watching a work of art that, if real, would be nothing short of tragic. As with all works of fiction, we are able to indulge our emotions and our imagination into something different, something that isn't us. Whether it's a romance or a fantasy that takes place very far away, we know it isn't real, and it can be necessary for all forms of fiction to exist. This applies to horror as well. Horror is necessary, so it existing is okay. With the dark arts and the misconception, there are many different subgenres and types that were aforementioned.
Multiple different types of horror exist in total, from existential to paranormal. A personal favorite of mine will always be a mix of existential and psychological. I've always been, and probably always will be, a sucker for think pieces that leave me disturbed far after I've actually consumed the content. Horror has the power to leave you with a permanent message, and one that will be bound to cause discomfort or dread at the mere thought of. That is an incredibly powerful thing to be capable of, and for me, psychological absolutely nails that. I love seeing and thinking about what would happen if humanity is pushed to the edge, how little our minds can handle, and what humanity can do when taken to truly dark places. Horror opens up some of the most entertaining and creative avenues I've ever seen, and I can't ever get enough of it. Things like mouthwashing, Fear and Hunger, and novels like The Green Mile are a few good examples. Like all media, horror exists in a nuanced state where yes, it can be used negatively and create a harmful impact, but on the flip side, it's fully capable of having positive outcomes, themes, messages, and more. The way in which it's presented has just been shuffled around. Sexism in horror is an objectively bad thing in the same way things like snuff films are a scourge. But these things shouldn't demonize the genre for you because these things exist across all forums. Horror has brought joy through things like children's horror, games you know and love, biting novels, and more. You just need to be willing to engage with the content on a wider scale. Call out the bad aspects, but don't let them be what dictates the entire genre.
And given the different types of horror, whether it's a werewolf gnawing your face off, or the psychological themes and twists of the games mentioned, or sticking your head out the car window, these movies usually have a premise. I've said I love them. We both do.
Yeah.
But a small rant that I have in different types of horror that swindles my love is there are premises that have been experimented with that are pretty damn lame. Like, what if an online group call was haunted? Or getting a Disney character and making them really evil is also lame. Like Bambi and Winnie the Pooh and the other 3 Mickey Mouse character related ones that are currently in progress. But hey, it could be stupid fun too, I guess, but these things are redundant and washed and clearly critics hate them. Do the fans exist? Although this is more petty than receptive, I guess. I just think it's nice to have an interesting premise in a non-petty way. One I recently watched is Hush, which is a movie about a woman who lives out in the woods in isolation. She's attacked by a serial killer who's a madman, except she's deaf. I thought Hush was great. It was a grounded survival film where they used her disability to elevate the film and put an interesting twist on the genre. As a bonus, they also display it in a very tasteful way without ever dipping into a problematic sphere. And recently I've rewatched Scream 1, 4, and 5. Scream is one I'd like to give praise for in the slasher genre because of how the movies are a twist on the subgenre itself. A parody in a way, but it's still grounded nonetheless. It's tasteful, it's enjoyable, and it's probably a personal favorite. As said, we love them. There's a lot to praise. This wasn't about the praise. Misconceptions are harmful because they can close you off from enjoying any things you might find tasteful. And if blood and getting your mind absolutely blown might freak you out, there's always more family-friendly types that you can enjoy. We promise that it can be so much more than meets the eye.
Being uncomfortable may be unpleasant, but that will never be a reason to see the horror genre as less than or wrong. It can be easy to associate a dislike/distaste feeling with an objective moral standpoint, but hopefully we've dissuaded you from that line of thought. And if we didn't, I'm gonna kill Josh.
Hello, lot owners. I want to play a game. We're currently handcuffed to a chair while we're in a thin mat.
Is Saw not an example of torture porn?
Stop breaking the fourth wall. If you don't uncuff yourself and take off that dumb hat in 30 seconds, you'll be making this bit too long.
Who the fuck are you?
I'm straight Jigsaw. Cat.
Thanks for watching. I love Linear fans. Don't forget to subscribe, like, favorite, and share with your friends.
Yo.
I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.